What's up, guys? Do your turbos sound like this? Well, today I'm going to show you how to replace the wastegate. Here I've got the two turbos out of the N63 from Project 750 Li, and by the time you guys are watching this video, the project will probably be done, but I'm doing these as I'm reassembling the engine for part 3. Both of these have excessive wastegate play, and normally the BMW repair would be to replace the entire turbo, which is obviously the best option, but also the most expensive one. If you can afford to, then sure, I'd agree that replacing everything is the way to go, but that's going to cost you a few $1,000s. So instead, I picked up this kit on eBay for only about $100, and it includes everything you'll need to replace the wastegates on both turbos. I won't mention a specific brand, but do some research and you'll find lots of options. This fix will also work on lots of other models like the N20, the N54, the N63, or many others. Obviously, if your turbo is damaged or doesn't spin freely, you'll have no choice but to rebuild or replace them. In this case, the turbos are good. There's no shaft play and they spin freely. So the only issue is the wastegate. Now, if it gets really bad, you can get some boost related codes because the wastegate is so loose, it can't even close properly. Let's take a look at what the kit includes. So you'll get the replacement flapper along with the metal bushing that sits inside the turbo. So the way it works is the metal bushing is inside and the flapper spins like this. And so over time, this bushing gets worn out and that's where you'll get that play. So you can see here with the old bushing that there's quite a lot of slop in it and it's very loose. And so if you take a look at the flapper itself, you can see that on the back side, it was starting to have an issue closing. So like I mentioned, it wasn't throwing any codes yet, but it was quite close to. On this side, you can see that it's been replaced and there is no back and forth play. So up and down is normal and the flapper itself should also move. But when you take the shaft, there shouldn't be any back and forth play. The way this works is you grind off the old attachment point here. So these are welded from the factory and you'll have to re-weld them to make it work. So if you don't have a welder, you're not going to be able to complete this repair. Once you grind that point off, the flapper inside will fall out and you'll have the bushing left inside the turbo. Once you press the bushing out, we press the new bushing in, install the new flapper, install the new attachment point, re-weld this, and then readjust the turbo wastegate to match the same way it was before. So the first thing we have to do is mark the close position of the wastegate so that we can reinstall it as close as possible to that same position. And then if any adjustments are required, we can do it with a few spins of the adjustment screw here. So when we close it, you can pay attention first to the top and we can see that the knurled section of the rod matches up with the bracket here. Something else we can do is close the wastegate and then mark it with something sharp so that we actually have a marking in the metal that we can line ourselves up with when we come to re-weld the new piece in place. We'll start by removing this clip here. Now we can detach the arm. We'll close the turbo wastegate and then we can mark the position of it with the knife. So you just want to scribe the metal, give yourself something of an idea to line yourself up with when you're putting the new piece in place. So now we can see we have that line there. Next, I'm going to remove the vacuum actuator just so we can get a little bit more room. So this is just two 10mm bolts. Now we can go ahead and grind this off. So what I like to do is hold it closed just so that this thing is not moving around while we're grinding. So to do that, I'm just going to take a clamp and clamp the wastegate shut. This doesn't have to be very tight. Again, it's just to prevent this from moving around too much. There we go. So now when we unclamp it, the wastegate will fall through. Next, what we have to do is press this bushing out. But before we can do that, they're actually welded in place. So you can see from the factory, there's this little weld point right here. What we'll have to do is drill through that, and you can see it on the new bushing. There's a point for it to grip. Obviously, there's a bunch of different ways that you can drill this pin out. I have a drill press here, so I'm going to use that. This is quite hard metal, so you want to use a good quality drill bit on a slow speed. Don't go too fast because you will just burn out your drill bit. So I believe I'm through. We'll dust this off and take a look. Now it's quite hard to see on camera, but we have drilled all the way through and we can see the gap between the bushing and the turbo. So now this is free and we can press it out. So I've seen a couple people online trying to hammer it out or using slide hammers. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of that. I rather use some kind of a press tool. So what I've done is I came up with this, where I'm just using an 18 mil socket on this end, which fits perfectly over the bushing. Put this through a couple of washers. Then using a 10 mil, as that is perfect for the inside diameter, I put that, again, extra washer with a nut on the end. And then as you tighten this down, basically you're going to be pressing the bushing out this way. So I'll tighten this up. So I'm going to hold the nut on this end. I put my ratchet on this end, and slowly I start pressing it out. Now, at one point, this gets to be a little bit too short, so I have to switch the socket out to a deep one. And there we go. Take that off. As you can see, the socket fits through perfectly, so 10 mil is the perfect tool. And inside here, we have our old bushing. So if we take a look at this, we can see again a whole bunch of play on this bushing and shaft. So now we'll replace these. So here I have the turbo rigged up in my press. I have seen some people try and hammer these bushings in. Just be careful, because if you're hammering, you can end up mushrooming the bushing. So just make sure it's spinning properly after you install it. But it's not a very tight fit, so it is doable. Other thing to keep in mind is make sure that the flapper is installed before you start pressing this bushing in. Because if it's pressed in, due to the angle, you won't be able to fit the new flapper in. Another thing is, for the insertion depth, you have to be sure that you line up this groove with the hole that's on the other side. Now, the way I have it rigged up in my press, you can't see it, but make sure that when you're pressing down, the hole for the pin lines up with the groove in the bushing. So we can see the flapper spins freely, it's pressed in at the right height, and now we can weld the attachment point. Next thing we have to do is weld this retaining pin into the turbo so that the bushing doesn't move. First, we'll need to grind off a little bit of metal here to make sure that the weld can stick to a good surface. And then lastly, I'm just going to wipe the surface with acetone to be sure that the metal's perfectly clean. There we go. To do the weld, I'm going to use a TIG torch. Now, I'm not a very good welder, but it doesn't need to be perfect. We just need to tack this in place. So I'll set my ground here, start up the machine, get my gloves on, and first I'll start by tacking it in place, and then I'll use a little bit of filler metal to try and fill in the hole as much as I can. Now again, I'm not a very good welder. This is not a welding tutorial. I'm just showing you what needs to be done, and hopefully your welding skills are better than mine. So I've got that tacked in place. I'm going to break off the rest. So there you go. It's not pretty, but it works. So there you go. Pretty good. And either way, you know the old saying, a grinder and some paint, make me the welder I ain't. So for me, that's good enough. Now this part is a bit trickier. So what you're gonna have to do is have the flapper in, and we want it closed. And then we want to put this piece on and line it up with the mark we made previously when we removed the original one. So we put that on and you weld it basically right there. The problem is, first you need to have this clamped and this clamped at the same time. So what I like to do is put the ground on the flapper itself to hold that. So once that's on, you're going to place this on top. You also want to be careful because it wants to move around. So make sure that it's flat on the pin. So again, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it holds, the flapper moves nicely, and that's all that matters. Now we'll put the wastegate actuator back on. So just slide it into the hole, slide these two in here. We'll put these two 10mm nuts back on. We'll get this on. And then lastly, we'll get the little C-clip back on as well. There we go. And so now we'll test and see when we close the wastegate, it lines up with that. And we can see that the knurled section here lines up with the bracket as it did before. So this one actually doesn't need any adjustment whatsoever. So there you go. How to fix your BMW turbos for only 100 bucks. Again, these two are off of an N63, but lots of other models like the N54 or S63 can be fixed using the same technique. If you thought this video was helpful, give us a like and let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks, guys.